I remember the first time I heard it. The soft tapping, almost polite, coming from the walls of the old house I had just moved into. It was late, the kind of night where fog clings to every corner outside, and the pale light of the street lamps barely reaches your window. I had curled up on the sofa with a blanket, the hum of the heater steady in the background, thinking the sound was nothing more than the old wood settling. But then it shifted, like a rhythm, deliberate, echoing footsteps pacing just beyond my door. The house had been empty for years, or so I thought, yet I could feel a presence, patient and unhurried. Every creak and whisper wind outside seemed amplified, and the shadows in the corners began to stretch, twisting toward me like fingers. I tried to breathe slowly, convincing myself it was nothing, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. And that's when I saw it, the fog press against the windows, thick and slow, curling around the corners of the old house. I could see my breath, pale in the dim hallway light. The walls smelled of damp wood and dust, the kind that clings to your skin. I was alone. It started with a whisper of movement, soft, deliberate footsteps circling. I held my breath, listening, trying to convince myself it was only the old floorboard settling. But the steps paused and I froze. When I shifted, they moved again. A vase trembled on the table behind me. The petals rattled like tiny bones. I dared a glance, and it was still. I looked away, and the hum of motion returned. I tried to follow the sound with my eyes. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that wavered like smoke. Something brushed against the corner of the rug. I knelt to check, but it was empty. The photo on the wall caught my eye. I hadn't noticed it before, an old black and white. A figure stood in the background, alone. I didn't recognize the person, but the angle, the posture, it was where I was standing. I reached for the frame. The glass was cold, heavier than it should have been. I tilted it to see the edges, looking for a trick of the light. Nothing. When I looked up, the room had shifted again. The steps continued, slow and deliberate. They circled closer, not loud, but close enough that my ribs felt their rhythm. The air grew thicker. I could almost taste it, metallic like blood or iron. I whispered my own name. The sound bounced back at me, hollow. No answer, just the soft, unrelenting steps. A drawer creaked open somewhere behind me. I could feel the draft like a cold finger tracing my spine. I turned slowly. Nothing. The fog pressed harder against the glass. Outside, the world seemed suspended, blurred by gray mist. Inside, I was under a watchful quiet. I could feel it, more than hear it. Another photo tumbled from the wall. It hit the floor with a soft thud. I froze. The image stared back. Someone standing where no one should be. Their eyes were just dark hollows in the pale light. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But the silence kept me rooted. The steps moved again. This time, slower, closer to the door. I pressed my palms of wood, feeling its age, its cracks. It was warm under my fingers, alive in its own way. I sank to the floor, back against the wall. The fog outside pressed against the glass like breath against skin. I could feel it seep through the old window frames. I dared to peek at the hall. Empty, still, but the smell of old wood and cold metal lingered. The steps had stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Just my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to know what had been circling me, what had watched while I slept, what shadow lingered just beyond the corners of my vision. I didn't move. I only listened. The fog swirled. The house held its breath. And I stayed, too, waiting for the next step. The nursery was quiet. Moonlight draped itself over the crib in pale silver, touching the soft curves of the blankets. I could smell the faint scent of lavender from the night lotion, barely there, almost imagined. The baby monitor hummed beside me, a low, steady hum, like the pulse of the house itself. Then static, a burst of white noise, sharp and crackling, filled the small room, and beneath it the whisper, soft, almost careful. It said my name. I froze. The hum shifted. Another whisper, this one closer. Or maybe the same one, crawling along the edges of the sound. My own voice, or something like it, trembled in the darkness. Shadows moved across the walls. Thin, curling shapes, stretching and folding in ways that didn't belong to the furniture. I could see the silhouette of the crib bending at the edges, as if it were breathing. I blinked. It was still. Almost. The monitor fizzed again, louder now. The whispers came faster, overlapping. I couldn't make words of them. Only the sharp familiarity of my own name, repeated over and over. It felt impatient. Hungry. I stepped closer. The rug felt rough under my bare feet, a little damp with a night chill. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't name, metal or perhaps old rain. A shadow moved just past the doorway, slipping along the wall like smoke. I reached out to the monitor. It felt warm, almost pulsing against my palm. The static deepened, and I thought I saw a figure in it. A face, pale, press the speaker. But when I blinked, nothing remained. I leaned over the crib. My breath stirred the blankets. The moonlight made the mobile sway. Shadows lengthened, curling toward me, a quiet rustling behind the curtains. I turned slowly. Nothing, but the whispers continued. My name again, drawn out, softer, closer, inside my own head now. I swallowed hard, but my throat felt heavy, coated in cold dread. I tried to call out, but my voice stayed small, trapped. The room seemed to shrink. The shadows pressed closer, their shapes folding and twisting into angles my mind refused to name. I felt the crib shift beneath my hands, just slightly, as if something inside it were alive. I shivered. The monitor went silent. Not sudden, not clean, but fading, like a breath left hanging too long. I waited. The moonlight reflected off the pale walls. Nothing moved. I could hear the baby breathing, even, slow and steady, untroubled. I leaned back against the wall. The scent of lavender was gone, replaced by cold wood and something faintly acrid. The hum of the monitor returned, softer this time. Normal, almost, and yet I could feel it there. The echo of whispers curling through the room, brushing against my ears, reaching toward the bed. I wanted to touch the monitor again. I didn't. I sat in the moonlight, staring at the crib, waiting, though I didn't know for what. The shadows settled finally, folding back into corners. But the memory of the voices lingered, quiet, patient. I didn't sleep. I just listened. The house smelled of cold wood and dust. Even in the daytime, the shadows felt heavy. At night, they stretched longer, curling along the walls. The attic door was old, warped, stiff, with paint peeling in long, curling strips. I could see it from the stairs, pale light spilling around its edges. Every night there was scratching, soft, hesitant, like nails tracing the wood from the other side. I tried to tell myself it was the wind or the house settling, but the rhythm, it learned my breathing. I would sit just below the door, staring, listening. The scratching stopped the moment I moved. Curiosity pressed against my chest. It was heavier than fear. One evening, I found myself standing before it, hands trembling. I pushed. The door groaned, metal hinges whining like teeth. A cold draft slid under the crack. I could smell mildew, a faint tinge of rust, and something else, something old, watching, waiting. I stepped inside. The attic was bare. Beams of moonlight cut across the floor, thick with dust. Every box, every trunk, empty. Nothing that could make a sound, nothing alive. I knelt, traced my fingers along the floorboards. They were cold, rigid, but smooth in patches like polished skin. I shivered. Then I felt it. Eyes. Not mine, not human. Burrowing into my back. A weight pressing into the hollow between my shoulder blades. I turned. Nothing. The silence pressed against my ears. Every heartbeat was a drum in a cathedral of shadows. I walked along the edge of the attic, brushing past old rafters. The scratching started again. Soft, patient, almost a whisper. But it wasn't coming from the floor. It came from the walls. From everywhere and nowhere. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The air smelled heavier now, like old paper soaked in rain. The dust shimmered in the pale light, tiny motes floating, and I could feel it following. I sat down on the cold floor, wrapped my arms around my knees. The attic didn't feel empty anymore. It was waiting, and I was waiting with it. Minutes passed, or hours. Time bent. The scratching slowed. The feeling of eyes didn't. They lingered, patient, silent. Finally, I left, closed the door behind me, locked it with trembling fingers. Even then, in my room, under my blanket, the feeling persisted. Something watching, something quiet, something that would always be there. I don't go near the attic anymore, but at night, I hear it. Soft scratches, waiting, and I can't stop thinking. One day, I might not just hear it. The evening pressed against the windows. Wind rattled the panes, thin and restless. I sat on the edge of the couch, listening. The heating vent hummed softly. At first, it was just a murmur, a quiet vibration through the floor. Then words, soft, deliberate, not my name, not exactly words I knew, but something inside me recognized them, calling. I leaned closer. The metal grill was cold against my fingertips. A draft slipped past my neck, brushing the back of my hair, and I shivered. It carried something else, something wet, a faint, earthy smell like soil turning to rain. The whispering grew clearer. It wasn't a voice I could identify, yet it spoke of places I had never been, memories I hadn't lived, hints of laughter, shadows folding in corners, a feeling of being watched, even in the soft glow of the lamp. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, the old pipes, but the words lingered, shifting through the vents, sliding into the room like smoke. I drew the blanket closer around my shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of mothballs. Cold fingertips traced along my arm. I froze. The whispering slowed, careful now, as if amused. I wanted to step back. I wanted to leave the room. But the floor seemed to hold me. The couch seemed to deepen into the carpet. The vent, it was breathing. A name, soft, brushed my ear. I don't remember ever hearing it. It wasn't mine. Yet it struck a hollow chord inside me, something unclaimed and aching. I held my breath. The wind outside paused and silence pressed in. Then a rustling, light, deliberate, like fingers brushing the pages of an old book. But there was no book. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to run. But the words, they waited. They curled around my thoughts. Soft, persistent. A chill rose up my spine, settling between my shoulder blades. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, air moving through the vent, shadows from the lamp. And yet, there was a pause in the whispering, a stillness that pressed against my ears, my chest, my skin. It lingered there, patient, watching. I finally let my hand drop from the vent. The whispers faded, drifting back into the pipes. But the chill remained, brushing past my neck in invisible fingers. I lay down, staring at the pale light on the ceiling. The wind rattled again, gentler now. A hum in the house, soft and continuous. The room smelled faintly of wet earth and dust. I kept my eyes open, tracing the shadows along the walls. The vent seemed ordinary again, cold metal, a simple grate. But I knew better. I felt it, and somewhere inside, something was still waiting. For me, the room smelled faintly of wax and dust. Night had settled like a heavy cloth over the walls. Only the candle on the coffee table burned, pale and hesitant. Its flame moved like it had a mind of its own, twisting, bending, almost breathing. I thought the draft from the cracked window made it dance, but the air was still. I sank into the couch, eyes fixed on the light. Shadows stretched long across the floor, curling against the edges of the room. Sometimes they seemed almost alive. A rustle near the bookshelf made my chest tighten. Soft, almost too soft to catch. I swiveled slowly, expecting the cat or a stray leaf. Nothing. The candle flickered again. The shadow behind it stretched upward, like someone tall had paused there. I blinked. It didn't move, not like a human should. I reached for the candle. Warm wax under my fingers, smooth, and yet it felt heavier than it looked. Heavier and somehow cold. The flame didn't waver. Not a hint of smoke, not a hint of dying. I blew gently, almost laughing at my own fear. The flame bent around my breath and stayed. I leaned back, The shadows on the wall seemed to flicker differently now. Faces, almost smiles, glimpsed and gone. I wasn't sure if my eyes were lying, or the room. A quiet hum filled the space. I hadn't noticed at first, but it lingered, like the memory of a note held too long. My heart beat loud in my ears. It wasn't coming from me. I reached for the window. The night was deep, empty. Only the moon, pale and distant, pressed against the glass. No wind, no movement. Yet the candle's flame danced like someone whispered behind my shoulder. The floorboards creaked softly. I froze. I could hear them, step by careful step, stopping just short couch. I swallowed hard. The shadows trembled. I tried to focus on the flame again. Long fingers of shadow clawed up the walls, stretching toward the ceiling. I could feel a chill rising through the floor, brushing my ankles. The hum deepened, almost like a sigh. Something shifted behind the curtain. A pale shape, just a suggestion of form, hovered there. My breath caught. I didn't move. It didn't move. I looked down. The candle burned steadily, unwavering. It didn't matter how much I stared, how much I wished it would end. The flame stayed. I felt my skin prickling, a gentle pull along my neck and arms. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though there was none. I leaned forward, studying the flickering shadows again. They twisted around the room, never settling. A soft footstep, or maybe just my imagination, traced the edge of the rug. I dare not turn my head. The shapes behind me had vanished, or perhaps I had stopped seeing them. I tried to focus on something mundane, the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of my heater, but both felt distant, muted. The candle flickered once more, and then, steady, the shadows pulled back toward the corners. The room felt larger, empty but waiting. I wanted to move, to blow it out, to leave, but I couldn't. There was a strange warmth in the flame, not comforting but anchoring, as if the room had folded around it, around me. Time passed, or didn't. I lost count. The candle remained. The shadows whispered just beyond the edge of sight. I breathed slowly, tried to tell myself it was only the night, only the light. And yet, when I finally looked away, I wondered if it had ever been just a candle. The room was quiet again. I sat still, ears straining, waiting. The flame flickered softly, like it knew I was watching, and I couldn't stop. The bathroom was cold. Fog clung to the wooden floorboards, curling around my ankles like something alive. The faucet dripped slowly, echoing. I leaned over the sink, watching the steam rise in pale, trembling waves. The mirror fogged, soft and heavy. I wiped the streak with my sleeve, and then I saw it. A shadow, faint at first, shifted behind my reflection. Not quite mine. I froze. It moved when I stayed still. It stayed when I moved. It mimicked me perfectly at first, raising an eyebrow, tilting its head, but then it didn't stop. A smile formed, slow, wide, hollow. I didn't. I blinked. My reflection stayed. The shadow lingered, smiling, waiting. I leaned closer. The glass felt colder through my fingertips than it should. The steam curled around the edges of the mirror, hiding the faint outline at first, then revealing it fully. It was me, almost, but wrong. Its eyes were too dark, its grin too cruel. I swallowed. My throat caught on silence. The bathroom light flickered once, twice. Shadows stretched along the walls. The wooden floor creaked, though no one moved. I stepped back. The mirror followed. Every movement, every hesitation. My pulse echoed in the hollow room. I could hear the water drip slower, each drop heavier, like a heartbeat not my own. The shadow tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally. I stepped to the side. It stepped too. I wanted to turn away. I wanted to leave. I couldn't. The smile widened, stretching the corners of its face. It whispered nothing, yet I heard it in the hum of fog, in the dripping in my own shallow breaths. A hand raised in the mirror. I froze. My hand remained at my side. The shadow's hand touched the glass from the other side. The surface rippled, like water under wind. I pressed my palm to mirror, cold, solid, unyielding. The shadow's fingers pressed back, Closer, closer. A shiver ran down my spine. I could smell damp wood, the faint bleach from the sink, and something else. Rot. Faint, like it had been hiding behind the walls for years. It smiled again. No words. No movement outside of the mirror. Just that awful, patient smile. I blinked. For a moment, the shadow froze, as if studying me. Then it moved again. Slow, mocking. Perfectly in sync, except for the smile. The smile remained when I stopped moving. I backed into the fog, floorboards groaning beneath my weight. Every step sounded like a whisper. Every shadow felt alive. I wanted to run. I wanted the door, the hallway, the cold air outside. But the mirror kept me, and then it smiled wider, tilting its head just a fraction. And I understood. It wasn't waiting for me to move. It was waiting for me to stop. I did. The bathroom held its breath. The fog swallowed the room. The smile lingered, and I knew, even if I turned away, it would still be there, waiting, smiling, alone with me. I stepped back once more. The reflection remained. The shadow remained. And in that cold, still fog, I could hear my own heartbeat faltering. Slowly, silently, I realized it wasn't me looking back. It never had been. The hallway stretched long and narrow. Dim light flickered along the peeling wallpaper. The pattern, once bright, was now faded, edges curling like old skin. I stepped slowly. The floorboards whispered beneath my weight. Warm air lingered behind me. The kitchen, maybe, or the living room. It smelled faintly of burnt toast and something metallic I couldn't name. A shiver crawled up my spine, not from the chill. Something colder pressed close. A breath. I felt it on the back of my neck. I froze. The light above flickered. Shadows twisted across the walls like they were alive. The silence in the hallway deepened, heavy as fog. Then a door clicked, soft, but sharp enough to make my chest tighten. I turned. Nothing. Empty doorway. The air behind me, once warm, now carried a whisper of ice. The wallpaper rustled slightly, though no breeze stirred. My fingers brushed the wall. Cold, damp. Every step I took felt louder than the last. I imagined or heard soft footsteps following. A faint hum rose from somewhere above. Or was it inside my head? The warm room behind me seemed distant, and yet I couldn't leave it. It pulled at me. I tried to move forward. A door to the left rattled. Not violently, just lightly, but enough. Enough to make my heart thud. The house remained silent after, except for the rhythm of my own shallow breathing. I glanced back. The hallway seemed longer now. Shadows stretched farther, darker. Something flickered in the corner of my eye. Gone. My skin prickled. Cold fingers traced my shoulder. I tried to shrug them off, but they weren't there. The warmth behind me seemed like a memory, and the chill like a promise. I kept walking. Each step echoed against the walls. I reached a narrow turn. The light pulled to the end, pale and uncertain. Something shifted again, just behind the curtains. I couldn't look. The door that had rattled earlier was now still. Yet I heard it again. A soft, drawn-out slam. The sound lingered in the empty hallway, vibrating in my chest. I paused. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and dust. The warmth behind me had vanished completely. Only the shadow of it remained, brushing across my skin. I felt eyes, none visible, tracking me. Another step. A floorboard groaned like it knew my name. I swallowed. The hum returned, quiet, vibrating low. The hallway narrowed further. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. Breath hit my neck again. Not warm. Not from me. Cold. Hollow. I froze. My heartbeat thumped too loud. Too fast. A door at the far end of the hall swung open. Slowly. I couldn't see inside. But I felt it. Darkness. Waiting. Something waiting. The hallway stretched longer than it should. Shadows pulled, reaching, trembling. I didn't move. I didn't dare. The hum faded. All that remained was the echo of my own breath. And the cold that lingered, brushing the back of my neck. Always there, even when I thought I had turned away. I stood. The hallway waited. I didn't. The attic air was always thick. Dust motes dancing in the slants of pale light from the single window. IT smelled of old wood and forgotten things of dried-out Christmas trees and mothballs. I was up there looking for a photo album that my mother said it was in a white box, but all the boxes were brown, warped with age. That's when I saw IT die in the far corner, tucked under the eaves of the doll. Its porcelain face was smudged with grime. Point one. I was a bright, glassy blue. The other was a web of fine cracks. Its dress was faded lace. The color of weak tea, IT sat propped against a trunk, staring at nothing. I left it there that IT was just a doll, not a thing for spiders to nest in. That night, I was in my room. The house was sleeping. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Then I heard it. Faint in a thread of noise woven into the silence, it giggled. IT was high and thin. Like the ringing of a distant wind chime, IT came from the ceiling. From directly above my beat skin when cold, I pulled the blanket up to my chin. I told myself it was a house settling or a mouse in the walls. But I knew it wasn't that. I lay there for what felt like hours listening. The only thing I heard was my own heart, thumping in my ears. Then I felt it, that a pressure, that a feeling of being watched, not from the door, not from the window, from above, from the attic. The next morning, I climbed the pull-down stairs. My hands were shaking. The air was just as still, just as dusty. The doll was no longer in the corner. IT was sitting in the middle of the floor, facing the staircase. It's cracked. I seemed to look right through me. I hadn't moved IT, and no one else was in the house. I didn't touch it. I just stared. The distance from the corner to the center of the room. It was a good 10 feet. That I backed away, closed the attic door with a soft click. I told myself I wouldn't go back up, but the next night, the giggling came again. Closer this time, IT wasn't above me anymore. IT was in the hallway, right outside my door, to a soft, tinkling laugh. Then the sound of tiny, soft footsteps, scuffling on the wooden floor. That I held my breath, that I didn't move a muscle. The footsteps stopped, right at my door. When the sun rose, I found the courage to open my bedroom door. The hallway was empty, but the attic door at the end of the hall, it was open, just a dark, narrow slit. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. I walked down the hall, and my feet were heavy. I pushed the attic door all the way open. The stairs were down. I looked up into the darkness. I could smell the dust, and something else, a faint scent of old perfume. I climbed each step slowly. Though it groaned under my weight at the top, I stopped. The doll was there. IT was sitting on the top step. Its head was tilted. Its grimy face was level with mine. IT had moved again. IT was at the very threshold. Point one more step, and it would be on the stairs. Point one more night, and it would be coming down. I didn't scream. I didn't throw away. I just looked into its one good it. IT was so blue, so deep. I felt a chill wrap around my spine. I turned and walked back down. I closed the attic door. I pushed the lock until it clicked. But I know it doesn't matter. Tonight, I will lie in bed. I will stare at my closed door, and I will listen for the giggle, for the soft, scuffling footsteps, for the sound of the attic lock turning all by itself. The fog was thick tonight, the solid, gray blanket pressed against my bedroom window, muffling the world outside. The only light was a pale blue glow from my clock. Point 3:17 a.m. I was staring at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks I knew by heart. That's when I noticed that the soft, inward curve in the wall to my right, where it should have been straight. I blinked, rubbed the sleep from my eyes. The curve was still there, to a gentle bow, as if the wall was taking a slow, quiet breath. I sat up. The air in the room felt dense, heavy to breathe. I reached a hand out. My fingers expected to find the cool, flat plaster. Instead, they met the surface sooner than they should have. I pulled my hand back, stared into the darkness. The wall was closer. The ceiling seemed lower, tilting down toward me like a heavy lid. This wasn't right. My room has been the same for 10 years. I know the exact number of steps from the bed to the door. 13. IT was always 13. I swung my legs out of bed. The floorboard were cold under my bare feet. Point one, step point two. The air grew thicker. With each 1.3.4, IT was getting harder to move, like wading through deep water. I stopped, listened. The house was utterly silent. No hum from the refrigerator. No creak of old wood settling. Just a dead, total quiet, and a faint, dry smell of old plaster dust. I looked back at my BED. IT seemed so far away, now a distant island in the deepening dark. The walls were no longer just curved. They were breathing the slow, subtle pulse that I could feel in the air. I turned toward the door. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I started walking again, 0.5 steps, 0.6. The space around me narrowed. The walls on either side were close enough to touch now. I could feel their presence at a cold, steady pressure on my shoulders. 7.8. The ceiling brushed against my hair that I ducked my head and my breath hitched, coming in short, sharp gasps. 9.10 that I was pushing forward now, my palms flat against the walls. They were warm, unnaturally warm, and slightly soft, like living skin. 11th, the door was just ahead, but it was different, smaller. The doorknob was higher than it should be, shrinking. I lunged for IT, fingers fumbled against the cool metal. I twisted. IT wouldn't turn. IT was locked or fused shut. 12, I couldn't take a 13 step. There was no room. The walls held me in a tight embrace. The ceiling rested on the top of my head. I was trapped, pinned in a space that was once my sanctuary. I closed my eyes, trying to wish it away, wake up from this dream. But when I opened them, it was worse. The pale light from the clock showed me the truth. The walls were still moving, closing in with a silent, patient purpose. The pattern on the wallpaper was stretching, distorting into shapes I didn't recognize. The air was so thin now that I had to gasp for it. This was my home. These were my walls. They have seen me sleep. They have heard me cry. They know the shape of my shadow. And now, they are taking me back, become my entire world. I let out a breath, a final, slow sigh. There was no more room for fear. Only a cold, quiet understanding. The walls met, and there was only the silence and the faint, dry smell of dust. The rain had been falling for 3 days. A steady, gray drizzle that blurred the windows and filled the gutters. I was unpacking the last box from the move, the one marked miscellaneous, full of things I didn't know where to put. The new house was a quiet, old place, all creaking floorboards and the smell of dust and dried lavender. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was long, shadowed, even in the afternoon. I'd walked down it a dozen times already, but this time it was different. There was a door, a simple white-painted door, set into the wall, where I was sure there had only been blank wallpaper before. My footsteps slowed. The air grew still. The only sound was the soft rustle of my socks on the wooden floor. I stopped in front of it. The white paint was clean, unmarked by time or fingerprints. The brass doorknob was cold, a perfect, untarnished sphere. I don't remember this. I would have remembered this. My hand reached out. The metal was so cold it almost stuck to my skin. I turned the knob. It moved without a sound. No click, no groan of aged hinges. The door swung inward and opened onto white, an endless, silent white. It wasn't a room. It wasn't anything. Just a vast, empty space. A pure, blinding brightness that seemed to go on forever. The air that drifted out was completely still. It smelled of nothing. Not dust, not damp, not life. It was a void, a silence so deep it felt heavy. I took a hesitant step over the threshold. The floor was smooth, a seamless, pale surface that met the walls and ceiling with no corners. My breath caught in my throat. The only color was me, my dark jeans, the faint pink of my own hand. Everything else was a sterile, infinite white. I took another step, then another. The door behind me remained open, a dark, rectangular picture frame hanging in all that nothing. It looked 1,000 miles away. I felt a sudden, cold prickle on the back of my neck, a sensation I knew from crowded rooms, from walking alone at night, the feeling of being watched. I stopped walking. I held my breath. The silence was absolute. It pressed against my eardrums, a low, humming pressure. I slowly turned my head. There was nothing there, just more white, more empty space. But the feeling didn't leave. It intensified, a weight of attention. I wasn't alone in this place. Something was here with me. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. But I could feel its gaze. A focus, patient stare from every direction at once. It felt ancient and curious. My heart began to beat a dull, heavy rhythm in my chest. I took a step back, toward the distant doorway. The feeling of being watched sharpened. It was like a physical touch. A cold finger tracing the line of my spine. I took another step. The dark rectangle of the door seemed no closer. The white stretched on. A perfect, silent desert. My skin crawled. I could feel them now. The eyes. Not one pair. Many. Unblinking. Studying me from the emptiness. Seeing the fear in my face. The confusion. They were drinking it in. I started walking backward. My steps quick, clumsy. My own breath was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Ragged. Terrified. The doorway began to grow. Slowly. Painfully slowly. The normal, shadowed hallway beyond was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I finally reached the threshold. My hand shot out, grabbing the cold doorframe. The familiar feel of painted wood. I pulled myself through, stumbling back into the hallway, into the world of color and sound, the smell of old house and rain. I turned, my hand shaking, and slammed the white door shut. It closed with a soft, final click. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, listening to the rain tap against a window. A normal sound, a real sound. I looked at the door. It was just a door again, plain, white, innocent, but I knew what was behind it now, an endless, watching white. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that on the other side of that silent, sterile space, something was still watching me. The house was finally quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a blanket, a damp, cold blanket. I was in the living room. The only light was a pale blue glow from the street lamp outside. IT seeped through the blinds, painting long, lonely stripes across the carpet. I let out a breath, out a small cloud in the chilly air, and that's when I heard it. A low HUMSO, deep. It was more vibration than a sound. I felt in my teeth that I and the bones of my feet on the floor. It wasn't the furnace. That was a different noise, a rattling groan. This was smooth, constant. I held my breath. The hum held its own dot of steady, silent pressure in the air. I took a step toward the hallway. The hum seemed to shift. IT didn't get loud. IT just felt closer, as if it had moved to meet me. My skin prickled. The air smelled of dust and the cold. I took another step. The hum slid away, pulling back toward the kitchen. This is silly, I thought. It's just a noise and old house settling. But houses don't settle with a pitch-perfect hum. I followed. I had MY socks whisper on the wooden floor. The hum stayed just ahead, a thread of sound, leading me on. I reached the kitchen doorway. The humming was here. IT was inside the walls, a soft vibration I could feel in my fingertips. When I touched the plaster, IT felt warm. Then it stopped. The silence it left behind was deafening. MY ears strained against it. The refrigerator kicked on. Its normal, rattling sound was a relief. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Turned to go back to the living room. And after 3 steps, the humming began again. Now it was behind me. Coming from the living room I had just left. My heart was a dull thud in my chest. This wasn't my imagination. IT was a game, and it was not my game to win. I walked back in the living room. The hum pulsed once a soft, almost friendly greeting. IT was near the bookshelf that I reached a hand out. The air around the old would seem to tremble. As my fingers were an inch from the shelf, the humming stopped. Then it started again from the top of the stairs at a low, inviting thrum. No, I wouldn't follow any more. I stood my ground. I clenched my fists at my sides. The humming from the stairs grew a little louder. IT wasn't angry. IT was curious. IT seemed to be asking a question I couldn't understand. Then it began to move. I didn't hear it travel. IT was just elsewhere. IT was in the ceiling light above me. The glass shade gave a faint metallic buzz. Then it was in the floorboards, dot a subtle tremor under my feet. It was everywhere at once, a soft, sonic cage. The whole house was breathing the single, quiet note. I sank onto the couch. The fabric was cold through my pajamas. I put my hands over my ears. The IT was useless. The hum wasn't in my ears. IT was in the air itself. I in the marrow of my bones. What do you want? I thought. The hum continued. Steady, impassive. I don't know how long I sat there, just listening, waiting for it to change, T.O. become a voice, that T.O. become a shape. But it never did. IT was just a hum, not a constant companion, in the dark. Eventually, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was still there, the cold knot in my stomach, but it was tired. I was so tired. I laid down on the couch, pulled the old Afghan over me. The humming was still there, filling the silence I had dreaded just an hour before. It wasn't a lullaby. IT was a presence, a thing that had chosen to stay. The street lamp outside flickered. For a single heart-stopping moment, the hum sharpened to a single high-frequency spike, like a question. Then it returned to its low, steady thrum, the same as before. I closed my eyes. The vibration ran through the couch cushions at a gentle, endless current. The last thing I heard, before I fell into a fitful sleep, was not the hum, but my own thought whispering back into the silence. You are not alone. The fog was thick outside the kitchen window. A solid, gray wall. It swallowed the backyard hole. The only light was the pale glow from the stove clock, casting long, soft shadows across the linoleum floor. I was just getting a glass of water. My throat was dust dry. The tap hissed and sputtered. A cold spray misted my wrist. I dried my hand on my pajama pants. And that's when I saw it. A shift in the darkness, near the refrigerator. A tall, thin shadow, darker than the rest. It didn't have a shape, not really. Just a stain in the air. A ripple in the corner of my eye. I turned my head. Nothing. Just the hum of the old fridge. The steady, familiar rhythm. I took a slow breath. Told myself it was nothing. Just the fog playing tricks. Making the world feel soft and wrong. I reached for my glass on the counter. My fingers trembled slightly. The water was ice cold. I took a sip, and I saw it again. This time it was closer, near the kitchen table. A lingering presence. A sense of movement frozen in place. I didn't want to look. I kept my eyes on the window, on that endless, shifting gray. But my heart was a frantic bird in my chest. I could feel a chill, a pocket of cold air right beside me. It smelled like old dust, like a room closed up for years. I forced myself to turn, to look directly at the space. Empty. The chair was pushed in. The placemat was straight. Everything was in its place. Yet the air felt different there, thicker. I took a step forward. The floorboard let out a soft groan beneath my weight. The shadow flickered, right at the edge of my vision. By the back door. It was taller now, stretching just for a moment toward the ceiling. Then it was gone. My breath caught. This wasn't my eyes playing tricks. This was something else. Something that knew I was watching. Something that only existed when I wasn't looking. I stood perfectly still, listening. The fridge hummed its low, electric song. The faucet dripped once. A single, sharp note in the silence. Then a new sound. A faint rustling, like dry leaves skittering across concrete. It came from right beside me, where the shadow had been. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stared at the refrigerator door, at my own faint reflection in its smudged surface. A pale face, wide, dark eyes, and behind me, in the reflection, a shape standing just over my shoulder, a form of pure blackness. It had no face, no features, just a stillness that felt like a scream. I spun around. My elbow knocked the glass on the counter. It shattered on the floor. 1,000 glittering pieces. The sound was violently loud. The kitchen was empty, completely empty. The fog pressed against the window. A silent, watching witness. I was alone. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the space where it had been, where I had seen it. The air was warm again. The smell of dust was gone. All that was left was the sound of my own shaky breaths, and the sharp, clean smell of spilled water. I looked down at the broken glass, and I knew I wasn't alone in the house. I was just the only one who could be seen. The study was always the coldest room in the house, especially in October. The air felt still, heavy with the smell of old paper and dust. I was looking for a book, anything to distract me from the quiet. But then I moved the heavy dictionary on the shelf, and I found them, a stack of envelopes, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were thick in my hands. The paper was brittle, yellowed at the edges. My name was written on the top one, in my mother's handwriting. A looping, elegant script I knew so well. But that was impossible. She had been gone for almost 10 years. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. It felt dry like a dead vine. The first envelope wasn't sealed. I slid the letter out. The paper whispered as it unfolded. "My dear son," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well in your new school. I know the other children can be cruel about your leg, but you must be strong." I stopped reading. My blood went quiet. A cold stillness settled in the room. I never had an issue with my leg. I was never bullied. I played soccer, ran track. My heart was a dull drum in my ears. I reached for the next letter, dated a few months later. "I am sending the money for the surgery." It read, "The doctor says they can fix a scar on your face. The one from the dog bite. No one will even know it was there." My hand went to my cheek. Smooth skin. No memory of teeth. No pain. Just a hollow feeling deep in my stomach. The next letter was thinner. The paper felt like ash. "The police came by again today, asking their questions. I told them we know nothing about the Henderson boys' disappearance. I told them you were with me that whole night, sick with fever. We must never speak of it again." I could feel the color drain from my face. The Henderson boy. I remembered him. He moved away before high school. We weren't friends. But now, his name felt different. Heavy. Wrong. I started reading faster. My breath catching in my throat. Letters about a broken arm. I never had. A fire I supposedly started. A deep, irrational fear of the dark that supposedly kept me awake for years. Each one was a thread from a life I never lived. A life stitched together with fear and pain. A different version of me. One that existed only in these hidden pages. The final letter was the oldest. The paper was thin as a moth's wing. It was dated the year I turned 7. "Happy birthday, my sweet boy. I put the baseball glove you wanted under your bed. I know you will love it, even though you no longer play after the accident at the lake, even though you won't go near the water." I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. I remember my 7th birthday. I got a red bicycle. I spent the whole summer learning to ride it, but I also remembered the lake. The cold, dark water. The way the reeds tangled around my ankle, pulling me down. The choking silence. A memory that wasn't mine. It was a ghost. A phantom limb of a past I never had. I dropped the letters. They scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Each one a secret. A lie. Or was it a truth from somewhere else? I looked at my hands. Were they the same hands? Was I the same person? The study felt smaller now. The walls closer. I am here, in this house, living this life. But somewhere in the dust and the silence of this room, another me is breathing. A me who is afraid. A me who is broken. A me who is guilty. And I can still feel him, waiting in the quiet between my heartbeats. The fog came in the night. It settled over the yard while I slept. A thick, white blanket, muffling the world. I stood at the back door, the glass cold against my palm. The world outside was gone, swallowed. Only the vague, dark shapes of the nearest trees remained, like charcoal smudges on wet paper. And there, in the dew-soaked grass, were the footprints. They started just a few feet from the steps, pressed deep into the wet earth. Small, bare feet. My breath hitched. A small, white cloud in the still air of the kitchen. I looked behind me, at the empty house, the silent hallway. The only sound was a frantic drum of my own heart. I had to see. I opened the door. The hinge groaned into the absolute quiet. A sharp metal sound. The air was cold and damp. It clung to my skin. I stepped onto grass. The dew soaked through my socks instantly. A shocking, icy wetness. I followed the trail. Each print was perfect. The arch, the 5 tiny toes. They led in a straight line. Aimless, heading from nowhere to nowhere. Walking alongside them felt like a violation. My own clumsy, shod footsteps were too loud, too heavy. I was an intruder in this quiet, white world. The fog pressing closer. It felt like walking through cold, wet cotton. My skin prickled. I could taste the dampness on my lips. The hairs on my arms stood up. I kept walking. The footprints continued their steady, impossible path. Then I saw it, the point where they simply stopped. One final, perfect impression in the grass. And then nothing. No more. Just the unbroken, dew-covered lawn fading into the white. My blood went cold. It made no sense. A person doesn't just vanish into thin air. I stood there, staring at that last print, my mind racing through explanations that wouldn't come. A bird cried somewhere in the muffled distance. A lonely, hollow sound. That's when I looked back toward the house. It was a gray silhouette in the fog, a ghost of a home. And in the window of the back bedroom, upstairs, a figure, a dark shape against the pale glass, just standing there, watching. My breath froze in my lungs. The figure was perfectly still, a cutout of shadow. It was in my house. I was out here, and it was in there. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. We just watched each other through the veil of fog. Then it was gone. Not a movement, not a shift. It just wasn't there anymore. The window was empty, just a dark, blank square. A silent scream built in my throat. I started to run. My feet slipped on the wet grass. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wild, trapped thing. I stumbled up the steps, fumbled with the cold metal of the door handle. I burst back into the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind me. The lock clicked into place. A frail, tiny sound. I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the cool wood, listening. The house was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that feels like a hell breath. I peered into the dark hallway. Nothing, just the deep, waiting shadows. My eyes were drawn back to window, the empty one, and I saw them, my own wet, muddy footprints, leading from the door to where I stood now, a trail I had made myself. But as I looked at them, really looked, I saw another set, fainter, overlapping mine, small, bare feet. They'd follow me inside. The shivering started then, a deep, uncontrollable tremor from a place deep inside my bones. I stood in the pale light of the kitchen, utterly alone, and yet I have never been less alone in my entire life. The air of my grandmother's house was always thick, thick with the smell of dust and old wood, and silence, except for the clock. It stood at the end of the hall, a tall, dark grandfather clock. Its face was a pale, yellowed moon in the shadows. I was packing up the last of her things. The afternoon light was weak, slanting through the dusty windows. I was wrapping a vase in newspaper when I noticed it. The ticking was wrong. It wasn't a steady tick-tock. Tick-tock. It was more of a tock-tick, a stutter, a catch in its mechanical breath. I stopped, my hand still on the newspaper. I watched the long, brass pendulum swing. Left, right. It seemed fine, but the sound it made was backwards. I shook my head. Just an old mechanism, worn down. I finished with the vase and checked my watch. 3:45. I decided to wait for the clock to chime the hour, to see if it still worked. I sat on the bottom step of the stairs. The hall was cold. The only light was that dusty, pale glow from the window. I watched the clock's face. The slender minute hand trembled. Then it moved. It didn't jump forward to the next mark. It slid back, one tiny increment, settling on 3:44. I leaned forward. My breath caught. That wasn't possible. I looked at my watch. It still read 3:45. The digital numbers were clear and certain. But on the grandfather clock, the minute hand was now firmly on 3:44. I stood up, took a step closer. The hand gave another little shudder, slid back again. 3:43. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The ticking grew louder in my ears. Tock-tick, tock-tick. The sound was all wrong. It felt like a finger tapping on the back of my skull. I looked away from the face. My eyes fell on the small table beside the clock. Grandma's reading glasses had been there, lying open on a book. Now they were folded, neatly placed on the corner of the table. I blinked. I was sure they had been open. I had seen them just a moment ago. I turned back to the clock. 3:41. An hour was slipping away. Right in front of me, I felt a strange pull in the air, like the room was holding its breath. The dust mote seemed to hang perfectly still, frozen in the weak light. I walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My hand was unsteady. The faucet dripped into a cup I'd left in the sink. Plink, plink. When I came back, I froze in the doorway. The vase I had wrapped and placed in a cardboard box was now on the table, still wrapped in its newspaper, as if I had just put it down. But I hadn't. I had sealed that box. I remembered the sound of the tape. I looked at the clock. 3:15. The pale light from the window was brighter now, younger. The shadows in the hall were shorter. My mouth went dry. This wasn't just the clock. It was the house. Time itself was coming loose, unraveling like an old thread. I walked slowly to the front door. I needed to get out, to feel the sun on my face. I reached for the doorknob. It was cold in my hand. I turned it, pulled. The door didn't budge. It was locked from the inside, but the deadbolt was open. I could see it. I pulled again. Harder. Nothing. It was as solid as a stone wall. I turned around, leaning my back against the door. The hall seemed longer, deeper. The grandfather clock stood at the far end like a silent watcher. 2:58. The light was a strong, clear light of late morning. I could smell my grandmother's perfume, a faint trace of lavender and powder. She had been gone for months. A photo on the wall caught my eye. It was a picture of me as a child, sitting on her lap. In the photo, my head was turned. I was looking at something just out of frame. As I stared, I saw it. My smile in the photo faded just a little. The corners of my mouth softened. My eyes lost their spark. It was a tiny change, a shift so subtle you would never notice it unless you were watching, unless you knew. I looked back at the clock. 2:17. The ticking had changed again. It was slower now, a deep, labored thump, thump like a tired heart. The pendulum swung in long, heavy arcs. I could feel each swing in my chest. I closed my eyes. I couldn't watch anymore. I just listened to the slow, backward heartbeat of the house. When I opened them, the light was different. The soft, gray light of very early dawn. The hall was full of long, deep shadows, and I was sitting on the floor, my back against the door. I don't remember sliding down. On the table, the newspaper around the vase was crisp and new, unyellowed. The clock read 7:04. In the morning, I had lost a whole day, or gained one. I didn't know. The dread was a cold weight in my lap, a mind-bending, quiet terror. There were no monsters, no ghosts, just a clock that ran backward, and a house where yesterday was slowly, patiently swallowing today. The air in the old house was always thick, stale. It smelled of dust and old wood, a scent that had settled deep into the floorboards. I was reading in my armchair. The lamp cast a weak, yellow circle on the pages. That's when I first heard it, a low hum, like a wire singing somewhere inside the walls. I closed my book. Listen. The hum softened, broke apart, into whispers. Not one voice, many, a soft, overlapping murmur, just on the other side of the flower-patterned wallpaper. My skin went cold. I pressed my ear to the wall. The paper was cool and slightly rough. The voices didn't get louder. They just continued. A secret conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I caught a single word. My childhood nickname, one only my grandmother used. A name no one in this world should know. I pulled away from the wall. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The whispers followed me into the kitchen. They bled from the cracks around the window frame. They were talking about the day I broke my arm in the 3rd grade, the specific shade of blue of the cast I'd chosen, the smell of the hospital antiseptic, the feel of the cool plaster. They knew it all. I climbed the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The voices climbed with me, drifting up from the spaces between the steps. A soft, feminine laugh echoed from inside the heating vent. It was the laugh of a girl I knew in college. A secret, cruel thought I'd once had about her. The thought I'd never spoken aloud. I needed to get out. I ran back down the stairs, my hand skimming the dusty banister. The front door was right there, a solid, familiar thing. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. I pulled. The door opened onto another hallway, identical to the one behind me. The same faded rug, the same sconce light on the wall. My breath hitched. I slammed the door shut. Open again. Another room. My own living room. The armchair. The book I'd been reading. Still open on the seat. A chorus of gentle, knowing laughter whispered from the ceiling. I tried every window. The one in the parlor, with its view of the oak tree. It now looked out onto the basement stairs. The dark, gaping mouth of the doorway down there. The kitchen window showed my own bedroom. I could see the rumpled sheets on my bed. The house was folding in on itself. A perfect, terrible loop that I was trapped inside its silent, breathing lungs. I ended up in the center of the upstairs hallway. Sitting on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest. The whispers were clearer here. They spoke in a rotating chorus. They recited my mother's last words to me, a private, painful moment in a sterile room. They described the feeling of the cool grass under my bare feet one summer evening when I was 7, the scent of rain on hot pavement. They knew every shame, every small, forgotten joy. They were not angry. They were not demanding. They were just sharing, remembering with me. And that was the most horrifying part. Their tone was gentle, almost loving. The walls felt closer now, the ceiling lower. The flower patterns on the paper seemed to pulse, to breathe in time with the whispers. I could feel the pressure of them, all those voices, all those memories, pushing in from all sides. There was no more outside, no more world beyond these walls. Just the endless, whispering interior. The gentle hum settled back into a soft, constant static, a sound that filled up all the silence. I closed my eyes, and in the suffocating dark, I realized I was whispering along with them. The air in the garden was cool, damp. IT carried the smell of wet soil, of rotting leaves. A full moon hung overhead that a pale, watchful eye in a black sky. Its light painted everything in shades of silver and charcoal. The lawn was a sheet of faded silver. The trees threw long, grasping shadows across the grass. I stood at the back door. The glass was cold against my forehead. I was just watching, listening to the absolute silence of night. Nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator inside and the soft, inner beat of my own heart. Then I saw it, a shift in the shadows between the two old oak trees. A figure, vague, more a thickening of the darkness than a solid thing. It was tall, impossibly so, and thin. It drifted to slow, weightless movement between the trunks. There was no rustle of footsteps and crunch of twigs. Just silence, a profound, swallowing silence where it passed. My breath caught in my throat, got a small, frozen knot. I pushed the door open. The hinge gave a soft sigh. The night air wrapped around me, chilling the skin on my arms. I stepped onto the dew-soaked grass. The wetness seeped into my socks, a cold, unpleasant shock. I walked toward the trees, and my own steps sounded too loud, a brutal intrusion in the quiet. The figure was still there, drifting down a smudge of deeper night. It had no face and no features, just a suggestion of a shape, not a human shape. I could feel it now at a pressure in the air, that a cold spot in the warm summer night. I moved closer, the grass whispering against my ankles. It was 20 feet away, then 15. I could see the moonlight through it. The silver light of the lawn showed faintly through its legs. IT was like looking through old glass, through dirty water. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panic rhythm. 10 feet. I could see the way it distorted the light. The way the shadows behind it seemed to swirl, T.O. bend. I took another step, that my foot came down on a brittle branch. The snap was like a gunshot. The figure stopped. It didn't turn. IT had no eyes to turn, but I felt its attention, a focused, icy weight settling on me. I couldn't move, that couldn't speak. We stood there, frozen in the moonlight, the observer and the observed. Then it began to fade. It didn't walk away. IT simply unraveled, starting from the edges. The dark shape bled into the night air, dissolving like smoke, like mist on a mirror. In a few heartbeats, it was gone. Nothing remained. Just the 2 oak trees, the silver lawn, the empty shadows. I stood there for a long time, the cold from the ground climbing up my legs, the silence pressing in from all sides. I looked at the spot where it had been, where nothing was now. A deep, quiet wonder filled me, a feeling that was not quite fear. Not anymore. It was something else, something older, the feeling of being watched by the night itself, and the quiet, eerie understanding that the night had blinked. The air in my grandmother's house was always thick. Dust motes danced in the last of the evening sun. I was supposed to be packing everything up, getting the old place ready to be sold. But the light in the hallway had other ideas. It was an old glass lamp that a single bulb hanging from a chain IT would flicker. Not a sputtering, dying flicker. This was a deliberate blink that a slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. I stood in the hall, a cardboard box in my hands. The light went out. For a full second, the hallway was a tunnel of pure black. Then it returned, harsh and yellow. Nothing had changed, just the same faded floral wallpaper. The same closed doors. It flickered again, darkness. This time, when the light returned, the door at the end of the hall was open, just a crack. I was sure I had closed them all. My own breath felt too loud in the silence. The only other sound was the soft clicking of the lamp. Click, darkness, hum, light. I took a step forward. The floorboard groaned under my weight. The light blinked in that slice of darkness. I saw it, the shadow, standing right where I was about to step, that a tall, thin silhouette. The light came back. The spot was empty, just the worn runner on the floor. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't stay there. The lamp continued its rhythm. Off dot on, with every blink. The hallway shifted. The picture frame was suddenly tilted. A vase of long-dead flowers was now on the floor. Shattered dry petals scattered like ash. The open door now swung wider, revealing a deep gloom inside the bedroom. I could feel a coldness seeping from that room. The draft that hadn't been there before. IT smelled of old perfume and damp earth. The flickering quickened. IT was no longer a pulse. IT was a frantic strobe. Light. The shadow was in the middle of the hall, closer. Darkness. The smell of perfume was right beside me. Light. The shadow was at my bedroom door, its arm outstretched. Darkness and a soft, rustling breath against my ear. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall. The flickering stopped. The lamp stayed on a steady, sickly yellow. The hallway was still. The bedroom door was shut tight. The broken vase was whole again on its table. Everything was exactly as it had been. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe a power surge. Maybe my tired eyes playing tricks that I almost convinced myself. Then the lamp flickered one last time. The quick, final blink I end that instant of darkness. I saw its face, pale and smooth. Where its eyes should have been, there was only a deep, static hollow. IT was standing an inch from me, close enough to feel the cold air coming off it. The light returned. The space in front of me was empty. I didn't pack anything else. I just sat in the living room, under a single steady table lamp, watching the dark mouth of the hallway. Waiting. The house was silent, but I could still feel that cold spot in the air, and I could still smell the faint, sweet rot of perfume. And I knew IT was just waiting for the light to go out again. The air in the old house was always cold, a deep, damp cold that clung to your skin. I stood at the bottom of the staircase. The wood was dark, stained by decades of shadow. A single pale light filtered from a dusty window upstairs. I placed my hand on the banister. It felt gritty, like dried earth. I took the first step. A low creak echoed in the silence. It was the only sound. For a moment, then a breath, not my own, a soft exhale that drifted from the space above. I froze. My own breath held tight in my chest. The house was empty. I had made sure of it. I took another step. Another groan from the wood. And then a whisper. It was less than a sound. More feeling in my ear. A rustle of thought. Stop. The word hung in the air like dust. I looked up. The landing was dark. A pool of nothing. My foot found the next step. Turn back. This one was clearer. A woman's voice, thin and frayed. It seemed to come from the very grain of the wood, from the nails in the steps. I kept climbing. The whispers began to overlap. A soft, staticky hum of voices. Some pleaded, "Please, no higher." Others urged, "Come closer." I could feel them. A faint pressure against my skin, like cobwebs you walk through in a dark basement. I was halfway up now. The pale light from above lit the steps in front of me. Each one was worn in the middle, dipped from years of use, from years of feet. I wondered whose. A step creaked loudly under my weight. The whisper stopped. A sudden, absolute silence. It was heavier than the noise. It pressed in on my eardrums. I could hear the slow, thick beat of my own heart. I couldn't move. The silence was a command. Then a new whisper, different, deeper. A man's voice, rough and tired. "She is waiting." The other voices returned, softer now, a chorus of murmurs, just below understanding. They weren't in the air anymore. They were in my head, filling the spaces between my thoughts. I climbed another step, and another. The whispers began to make sense, fragments of lives. I dropped my locket here. The child's laughter was so loud, he fell from this very spot. Each one a piece of a story, a ghost of a memory. I was near the top. The landing was just 3 steps away. A dark hallway stretched out beyond. The air grew colder, sharp against my lungs. The main voice returned. The woman's, clear as if she were standing beside me. "You can still go back, or you can see." My foot hovered over the next step. This decision felt immense, like a stone placed on a scale. To stop, to turn back into the safe, known darkness of the lower floor, or to go further, to see what called from the end of that dark hall. I chose. I took the step. The wood did not creak. It was silent, accepting. The other whispers faded away, retreating into the static hum, leaving only the woman's voice. It was no longer a whisper. It was just a thought. My thought. Almost there, I reached the landing. The floorboards were smooth and cold under my socks. The pale light came from a cracked door at the end of the hall, a soft gray glow. I took a step toward it, then another. The hallway seemed to breathe with me. In and out. I could still hear the faintest hum from the stairs behind me, a distant whispering sea. But ahead, there was only the light, and the quiet, and the slow, certain knowledge that something had been waiting, something that had been counting every step. I woke up in my own bed, the familiar weight of the blanket, the soft dent in the mattress where I always slept. Moonlight bled to the window, painting the floor silver. IT fell across my dresser, my chair, the closed bedroom door. Everything was in its place. I turned over, pulling the quilt tighter. My eyes drifted shut. Then they opened again. Something was off at a quiet wrongness in the air, like a single, silent note played out of tune. I looked at the wall opposite the foot of my bed, the one that should have held the closet door. It was blank, just smooth, unbroken plaster, and a pale expanse in the dim light. I sat up. The room was cold, my breath plumed in a soft, white cloud. I stared at the wall that my mind, still fuzzy with sleep, tried to map the memory of the door onto the empty space. But the door was gone at AS if it had never been there at all. I told myself I was dreaming, that the shadows were playing tricks. I lay back down, the pillow cool against my cheek. I listened to the absolute silence of the house. There was no hum from the refrigerator, an old tick from the clock on my nightstand. I looked at the nightstand. The digital clock was gone. In its place was a small porcelain figurine of a rabbit. I've never owned a rabbit figurine. The next night, I woke up with a start that my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I scanned the room immediately. The window was gone, the one that had been there just hours before. Where it should have been was more wall, seamless, a solid, dark surface that swallowed the moonlight. A low panic began to curl in my stomach. This was no dream. The air felt too real, too cold that IT smelled faintly of dust and old, dry wood. I swung my legs out of bed. The floorboards were icy under my bare feet. I walked to where the window had been. I ran my fingers over the wall. The IT was rough, slightly damped. IT felt solid, impossibly final. I turned to look at the room from this new angled MY dresser was now in the far corner. IT was angled strangely, as if pushed aside by a great unseen force. The chair was gone completely. I spent the rest of the night in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the darkness, listening to the nothing. The changes became more pronounced, more personal. One night, the framed photograph of my family on the beach vanished from the dresser. The faint, rectangular ghost of where it once sat was the only proof it had ever been there. Another night, the pattern on my quilt was different. Instead of familiar blue stripes, it was a faded floral print. The fabric felt thinner, older. The room itself seemed to be shrinking. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. The air grew thick, stagnant. I stopped sleeping. I would just lie there, waiting, watching the architecture of my life dissolve around me. Then, last night, the final door disappeared. The one I entered and exited through every single day. IT was simply not there anymore, just another blank, featureless wall. There are no exits now, no windows, no way out. The only furniture left is my BED. IT sits in the center of the room, an island in a sea of worn wooden floorboards. The light comes from nowhere and everywhere at a dull, gray glow with no source. IT offers no warmth and no comfort. Sometimes I hear a faint rustling, not from any particular direction. IT seems to come from the walls themselves at a dry, papery sound, like old leaves skittering across concrete. I don't try to call for help anymore. MY voice just falls flat in the dead air, swallowed by the silence. I just sit here, out on this bed, in this room that is and is not my own. I watch the walls, and sometimes I think they watch me back. The air is perfectly still. The only sound is my own breathing at a soft, shallow rhythm in the endless quiet. I'm waiting to see what vanishes next. The air in the hallway is always still thick. IT smells of old wood and dust. I pass the family portrait every day. It's been there since I was a child. My great-grandparents, stern and frozen in time. Or so I thought. It was last Tuesday when I first noticed something. I was getting a glass of water. The moon was full, casting a pale light through the stairwell window. MY eyes drifted to the portrait, MY great-grandmother's face. Her lips, they seemed different, not quite a smile, but no longer a straight line, just a slight upward curve at the corners. I told myself it was a trick of the light. The way the shadows fell from the frame, I went back to bed. The next night, I looked again. This time, I turned on the hall light. MY great-grandfather's eyes. They were always looking straight ahead, off into the distance. Now, they seemed angled downward, toward the floor where I was standing. The painted color seemed darker, less like blue paint, and more like a deep, wet pool. I stood there for a long time. The house was completely silent. I could hear my own heart, a soft, quick rhythm against my ribs. I started avoiding the hallway after dark that I'd use the other bathroom. But the portrait, it called to me to a silent, heavy pull. Last night, I couldn't resist. I had to know. I stood before it, my slippers cold on the hardwood. The changes were no longer subtle. MY great-grandmother's skin, once smooth and pale, was now lined a delicate web of wrinkles around her eyes. Her hair, once a solid brown, was streaked with fine threads of silver, and her expression, IT, was no longer neutral. There was a sadness there, a deep, weary grief in the set of her jaw. Her painted eyes held a shine they shouldn't, a glossiness, like unshed tears. I looked at my great-grandfather. His face was thinner, his cheeks slightly more hollow. The robust color had faded from his skin, leaving a grayish pallor. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They were fixed on me that I took a step to the left. Those painted pupils followed me that I stepped to the right. They tracked my movement without a sound, a slow, deliberate shift in the oil and canvas. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was happening. Tonight, I brought a chair from the kitchen. I placed it a few feet from the portrait. I sat down, my knees pulled to my chest. I decided I would watch. I would not look away. I would catch it in the act. For the first hour, nothing changed. The house settled into its nightly creaks and groans. The fridge hummed from the kitchen. Then a soft rustle, like canvas stretching. I leaned forward, my eyes straining in the dim light. MY great-grandmother's face seemed to twitched out a small spasm near her eye. It was quick, but I saw it. Her head tilted, just a fraction of an inch. Her gaze, which had been looking past me, now met mine directly. Her mouth opened slightly at a dark, thin line between her lips that know this. Wasn't right. I couldn't do it. I couldn't watch any longer. I pushed the chair back. The legs scraping loudly in the silence, I hurried to my room and closed the door. I didn't sleep. I just listened. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. This morning, I had to pass it. I kept my head down, my focus on the floorboards. But something made me look up. Just a glance, a reflex. The faces in the portrait were old, truly ancient. Their skin was a parchment map of deep lines. Their eyes were sunken, clouded with milky white strokes. Their postures were stooped and frail. They had aged a lifetime in a single night. And my great-grandmother, she was looking right at me. One of her painted hands was raised, that a single bony finger was pointing directly at me. I ran to the bathroom and slammed the door. I leaned over the sink, gripping the cool porcelain. My breath came in ragged gasps. I had to get hold of myself. I looked up into the mirror, and my own face looked back, and my skin, it seemed looser. The faint lines around my eyes looked deeper. More defined, I stared. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw my great-grandmother's weary grief staring back at me from my own reflection. The air in the old house was always thick. Dust and silence, layer like old paint. I was cleaning out my grandfather's bedroom, a room that hadn't been touched in years. The light from the single window was pale, weak, like faded tea. The mirror on the wall was massive, a heavy, tarnished thing in a wooden frame. The glass wasn't clear. It was foggy, clouded with age. When I wiped the dust from its surface with my sleeve, my reflection was a smeared, a ghost of a man in the dim light. I saw the smudge of my face, dark, tired eyes. But something was wrong with the edges. The reflection didn't quite end where it should. I pressed my fingers against the cold glass. The frame felt loose. There was a slight, yet a hollow feeling behind the wall. That heart made a dull, heavy beat in my chest. I worked my fingers in the seam between the mirror and the wall. And with a soft, grinding scrape, the whole thing swung outward, like a door. It wasn't a wall behind it. It was darkness, a space that smelled of old wood and cold stone. The air that drifted out was different, colder. It carried the scent of static and forgotten things. That I stood there, my breath a small cloud in the new chill. The doorway was a black rectangle, just tall enough to step through. I had to duck my head. The space behind was a small room, a perfect square, completely hidden from the rest of the house. And every single wall was another mirror, floor to ceiling, a box of glass. At first, I just saw myself a dozen copies of my own startled face. Pale in the gloom, same jacket, same messy hair. I took a hesitant step forward. The soft crunch of my boot on grit was the only sound, and then the reflection stopped copying me. The one directly in front of me was slower to move. Its step was more deliberate. Its eyes were wider, more curious. The one to my left didn't step at all. It just stared. Its head tilted too far to the side, a faint, knowing smile on its lips. My own lips were parted in confusion. I lifted a hand, my fingers trembling. The reflection in front mimicked me, but its fingers were longer, boned and pale. The one to my right was already looking away as if bored. It was studying its own reflection in another mirror, an endless, impossible loop. I turned to look behind me, the reflection of my back. But that version of me was already looking back. Its eyes were black pools. Devoid of any light, It took a step toward me from the glass, a soft footstep on nothing. I flinched away, My shoulder brushed against another cold surface. Another me. This one was older. Hair gone gray. Deep lines of sorrow carved into its face. It looked right through me. With a grief so profound it felt like a weight in the room, I saw another, younger, the boy I hadn't been since I was 8. He was crying silently. Tears cutting clean paths through the dust on his cheeks. I was surrounded a gallery of all the people I could have been. The people I was, the ones I might still become, they were all me, but none of them were. The air hummed with a silent pressure to 1,000 unspoken lives. I should have been terrified. I should have turned and fled back through that door, back to the world of single reflections. But I wasn't scared. A deep, eerie curiosity settled in my stomach. It was a cold, quiet feeling. I took one more step into the center of the room. The many versions of me shifted in their glass prisons, some stepped closer, some faded back, all of them watching. I looked from one face to another, this strange, silent family, and I wondered which one of us was going to blink first. The rain started just as I reached the old house at a cold, steady drizzle that blurred the line between the gray sky and the gray lake. I was only here to clean the place out, my grandfather's summer home. Empty for years. The key was cold in my hand. Heavy, ironed IT turned in the lock with a loud, metallic scrape, the sound that felt like it disturbed something. Something sleeping. The air inside was thick, stale with the smell of old wood and wet dust. But underneath it, something else, a faint, earthy smell. Like damp soil and rotting leaves, I closed the door behind me. The silence that followed wasn't really silence. It was a low hum that was so deep, I felt it more than heard it, a vibration in the floorboards and the soles of my feet. I stood perfectly still in the hallway, the MY bag dropped by my feet. The wallpaper was old, a faded floral pattern. Peeling at the seams, I reached out and pressed my fingertips against the wall. IT was warm. Not from the sun. There was no sun. It was moving at a slow, gentle pulse, at a steady rise and fall beneath the faded roses. Like a sleeping animal, I pulled my hand back, that MY heart was beating in my throat. I took a step forward. The floorboard creaked, not a sharp, sudden crack, but a long, low groan. Then another, and another to rhythm, like the house was breathing. In and out. I walked slowly into the living room. MY footsteps fell into gaps between the creaks, down a strange, syncopated dance. The large front window was clouded with grime. Through the rain, the world outside looked distant, unreachable. I saw my reflection in the glass, pale, eyes wide. And behind me, the hallway I just left, the walls seemed to swell, then contract at a slow, living wave. It's just the wind, I thought, settling foundations. But there was no wind, and the house was stone. A soft rustle came from the corner of the room. I turned my head slowly. Nothing there, just an old armchair covered in a dusty white sheet. It looked like a ghost, but the sound came again, a gentle rustling. Like dry leaves, IT seemed to be coming from inside the walls. I walked over to the fireplace. The mantel was covered in a fine layer of dust, except for one spot that a clean, oval shape, as if something had been resting there. Recently, I leaned closer. There was a whisper, not in the air, not in my ears. IT was a vibration that traveled up from the floor. Through my bones, a single, silent word in my mind. Stay. I stumbled back, MY breath hitched. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I needed to leave. I turned to go back to the front door. It was gone, not gone. The hallway was there, but the walls had shifted. They were closer now. The passage was narrower. The floral pattern on the walls seemed to swirl. The pulsing was stronger here, at a steady, rhythmic throb. I reached out a shaking hand. Touched the wall. IT was warm and slightly moist. I could feel the beat against my palm, at a slow, heavy heartbeat. The house was alive, and it knew I was here. I turned, looking for another way out. The kitchen. There had to be a back door. I moved quickly now, my own breath shallow and fast, a stark contrast to the house's deep, steady rhythm. The kitchen was worse. The linoleum floor was soft, spongy under my feet. IT gave way with every step, that a faint, sweet smell rose from it, like decaying fruit. The cabinets were closed, but from behind them I heard a soft, wet sound, a squelching, like roots moving in wet earth. I saw the back door. IT was across the room, the rectangle of dull gray light. The MY escaped. That I took a step. The floor in front of the door swelled, a gentle, rolling mound pushed up from below, blocking the way. The linoleum stretched and tore with sound like ripping flesh. That I watched frozen as the mound subsided, leaving the path clear again. It was a warning, or an invitation to try. I didn't move. I just stood there, in the middle of my grandfather's kitchen. The walls pulsed around me. The floor breathed beneath me. The air hummed with a deep, contented sound. It didn't want to hurt me. That I understood that now. IT just wanted me here, a part of it. I sank to my knees. The floor was warmed. I placed my hand on it, felt the slow, steady beat in and out. My own breathing began to slow. Match its rhythm, and in and out. The dread was still there, the cold stone in my chest. But it was a quiet dread, a accepting one. The light from the windows faded into a deep, breathing black, and the house held me and watched and breathed. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the quiet of a sleeping house, but a deep, hollow silence. I was reading in my living room, the old lamp casting a warm, yellow circle on the page. Then it stopped. The low, constant hum of the refrigerator vanished. The gentle whisper of central air gone. Even the faint, almost imperceptible buzz from the street lamp outside my window, it just ceased. It was as if someone had placed a giant glass dome over the entire house. Sealing me in, I lowered my book. The rustle of the page was unnaturally loud. It felt rude. I held my breath. And in that absence, I could hear the slow, thick pulse of blood in my own ears. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't just inside me. The sound seemed to fill the room, echoing off the walls, a lonely drum in a vast, empty space. I stood up. The floorboards didn't creak. They just swallowed my weight, giving back nothing. I walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. The world outside was a still photograph. The oak tree in the yard was perfectly motionless. Not a single leaf trembled. The street was empty, and no cars. No people. The moon was a pale, cold coin in a black sky. I tapped the glass. Should have made a sharp, clear sound, but it was a dull, dead thud, like tapping a stone in a deep, dry well. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was wrong. This was deeply, profoundly wrong. I moved into the hallway, and I saw footsteps were absorbed by the thick, heavy air. The silence pressed in on my eardrums at a physical weight. I could hear the soft, wet click of my eyelids blinking, the shift of my sweater against my skin, the low grind of my own jaw clenched tight. I called out, "Hello?" My voice didn't travel. The IT didn't bounce or fade. IT just died the moment it left my lips, swallowed whole by the stillness. A prickle of sweat traced a path down my spine. The air felt thick, stale. I realized I couldn't feel a draft, not from the windows, not from the vents. The air was perfectly, utterly still. I made my way to the kitchen, reached for the faucet, and my hand was trembling. I turned the handle. I saw the water rush out at a sparkling, clear stream, but it made no sound, and no splash in the sink, and no gurgle down the drain. IT was a silent movie, a frantic, desperate pantomime. I turned it off, then my heart was hammering now. The thump, thump, thump was the only thing left in the world. IT was too loud, a frantic, trapped animal beating against the walls of my own chest. I covered my ears with my hands. But it was no use. The sound was inside my skull. IT was me. I sank to the floor. The linoleum was cold through my jeans. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself small. I looked around a familiar room, the table where I ate breakfast, the fridge with my niece's drawing. IT was all my home, but it felt alien now, a museum diorama of a life, preserved under glass. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise. IT was a presence, an entity. IT sat in the corner of the room, a dark, patient shape, watching me, listening to the frantic rhythm of my fear. I closed my eyes, tried to remember a sound, the chirp of a cricket, the distant whistle of a train, the comforting murmur of a television in another room. But my memory was silent, too. I was completely, utterly alone, adrift in a sea of nothing. The only proof I still existed was a terrified beating of my own heart, the tiny, lonely signal, broadcasting into a vast, indifferent void. And the silence listened. The fog came on the final night. It didn't roll in. It settled. A thick, white silence against the windows, smothering the world beyond the glass. Inside, the house felt different, larger, emptier, and the shadows, they moved, not like a trick of the light, not a flicker from a dying bulb. This was a slow, deliberate shifting in the corners of the room, a dark pulse. I stood in the center of the living room. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet. The air tasted of dust and damp, of old wood. I held my breath, listened. There was no wind, no distant hum of a car on the main road, just a heavy, woolen quiet of the fog, and a soft, rustling scrape from the hallway, like dry leaves skittering across stone. I didn't want to look. My head turned anyway. The hallway was a tunnel of deeper dark. The door to the bedroom was shut. It hadn't been a moment ago. My heart was a dull, aching thud in my chest. I took a step back. My shoulder brushed against the cold wall, and that's when I felt it, the certainty. A cold stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. I had been watched, not just tonight, for a long, long time. Every quiet moment I thought was mine. Every private sigh. Every lonely tear wiped away in the kitchen's pale light. They were all witnessed, collected. The shadows in the corner of my eye weren't my imagination. They were an audience. A shiver traced its way down my spine. A cold finger on my skin. I looked at the front door. A slab of painted wood. It seemed so flimsy now. So meaningless. My phone was on the coffee table. A little black rectangle. I picked it up. The screen was dead. No light. No life. I pressed a button. Nothing. I held it to my ear. Not a dial tone. Not even static. Just a hollow, empty silence. A perfect void. There is no one to call. The thought didn't arrive with panic. It came as a simple, chilling fact, like the temperature dropping. You are alone here. Truly alone. Except for them. A shadow detached itself from the far wall. It didn't slink. It didn't creep. It simply unfolded, stretching upward like rising smoke, taking up space. It had no eyes, no face, but I felt its gaze. A physical pressure against my skin. A dry, ancient smell filled the air, like forgotten pages in a sealed tomb. Another shadow stirred near the bookshelf, then another by the kitchen doorway. They didn't move toward me. They just settled into their observation, resuming their vigil. This was their home. I was the temporary thing inside it, the guest who had overstayed. A soft, breathy whisper brushed against my ear. It wasn't a word. It was a feeling, a sensation profound, endless loneliness. It was my own. I sank to my knees. The cold from the floorboards seeped into my bones. There was no point in screaming, no point in fighting. The terror wasn't a sharp thing anymore. It wasn't a gasp or a jolt. It was a quiet, sinking weight, a resignation. This is how it ends. Not with a bang, not with a struggle, but with a soft, final acknowledgement. I looked up at the shapes in the dimness. They watched me, patient, eternal, and I knew with a dread as quiet as the fog outside that I would never be lonely again.